What is up, YouTube? I wanted to drop a little video to share some context and thoughts for an article I just released. If you haven't read it yet, I would start there. I would click the link in the comments to my blog titled The Tempest and the Tidal Wave, 5 e-commerce challenges on the other side of COVID. And this is something that's sort of been brewing in me for a little while. About a year ago on May 1st, I released another sort of state of the industry article called Swing, Why Brand Owners Need to Push All In Right Now. And the reason for that was a similar feeling I had to the one now, which is that something unique was happening in our industry. And in that case, a year ago, it was the idea that COVID, which was initially appearing to be this big risk to businesses, was suddenly a giant tidal wave of momentum for the e-commerce industry. We saw April turn into this incredible arbitrage where a ton of giant players pull out of the advertising space, CPMs plummeted, and all of a sudden e-commerce direct response advertisers were able to take advantage and see results they hadn't seen in years. It was like 2017 all over again. And so at the end of that, it became clear that when we went into lockdown and retail shut down, and a bunch of advertisers couldn't spend money, that e-commerce was going to have a moment. And I felt really clear on that based on the data that we were seeing. And so we encouraged everybody, go now, push, go after new customers, go as aggressive as you can against growth, because this moment, this place right now, it's unique. It's a black swan event. Well, now we sit here a year later, at the end of that, with many of us having experienced our best years ever. I would say the vast majority of CTC's brands, as well as our own in-house brands, had their best 12-month period ever. And if you looked April to end of March, you're looking at some of the best results they could have imagined, far ahead of their previous projections, especially in some categories like outdoor products or anything gym-related, in-home gym-related, or CPG. There were just categories that just exploded. But now, sitting here, I have a similar gut feeling. Something unique is about to happen, but it's in the other direction. And I want to clarify that what I don't mean is that I think e-commerce is going to go backwards suddenly. I just mean that we are existing in sort of a countercultural experience where COVID was this terrible cultural moment that crushed many businesses, that was horrible for us as a species, but e-commerce benefited. Well, suddenly now we're reaching the end of a pandemic that's great for us as a species, and we're going to have this massive influx. You're hearing all this talk of the roaring 20s and everyone's excitement to get out and do things. But in the midst of that, I think e-commerce might not be the primary beneficiary of that change. And what has happened is that I think we're going to continue to see e-commerce growth. Many of the habitual changes of shopping online, they're here forever. Our industry has moved forward on the macro level and will continue to. But on the individual level, individual brands, those of us, and especially in this $0 to $50 million early stage business, I think there are challenges ahead. I think we're going to go from tidal wave to storm to tempest to facing headwinds in 5 very specific ways. And that's what I outlined in the article. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about those and what I'm seeing in a way that really clarifies my position as it relates to what's ahead for people and allows us to walk into this eyes wide open. This is also my preferred form medium, is just to talk rather than to write. So I wanted to add this as a layer to the article and talk about each of these points. So the first one is this idea that in the article I call broken compasses. And this really has to do with what I'm seeing around forecasting. So last year, the challenge was really trying to forecast growth. How much revenue do we think we can do? How big will it be? And most of the narratives I heard was that we under forecasted, was that inventory and supply chain became the constraint in the system. The reality is for e-commerce businesses, those are privilege problems. Those are good problems. Those are the kinds that don't make you go broke. They're the kind that make you sit around and have conversations about how much money you could have made. But now the danger is, if we assume the growth rate from 2020 is what we should have happen this year, we could make mistakes that actually are threatening to our business. And those are the mistakes where you over-order, you overcommit capital to inventory for demand that never shows up. And so to avoid that, the way we'll get in that trouble is if we just take last year's number and we're going to grow 50% year over year. And the danger is it might have happened in January. It might have happened in February. It might have happened in March because those were all pre-COVID months. But if you start forecasting that kind of growth into April, May, June, July, August, there's a real danger that demand isn't going to show up because the macro cultural moment of the lockdown and COVID effects aren't there. So we really need to be disciplined about using cohort-specific LTV models to forecast our revenue on the basis of what's happening now, not on what happened a year ago. And it's really important that we don't make big inventory outlay commitments against bad data. And so that's sort of what I'm talking about when it comes to broken compasses. I worry that some of us are going to experience this expectation of growth based on previous years from people who are too far from the specific data and don't understand exactly where that's actually going to come from and how unique the CPM arbitrage of last year. Like if we start looking at last April's ROAS and going, why is my ROAS this April worse than last year? If we don't understand how unique that moment was, we'll miss it. The second point is related to just the reality of what a disproportionate share of consumers' wallets online spending was last year, and the fact that things are opening back up and suddenly retail and experiences and vacations and travel all become options again. And so in this way, the competition for our share of consumer spending increases dramatically. And this is an important thing for us to understand as we think about how much money people are going to be spending on in-home gym equipment this year or on new kayaks or whatever it might be, that were moments that this actual available additional line item made possible last year, is that the industry of e-commerce could continue to grow, but your individual brand need for the consumer might change. The allocation of those dollars could change. This is a little hypothetical. I don't have specific data yet to verify this. It's something I just want to plant as a seed of awareness for what happens when suddenly everyone's eager to get together and go on vacation and travel and go do things that they weren't able to do last year. How does that affect how people spend their money? The third thing is something that you've probably just heard beaten dead over and over, is just this idea of the iOS and the privacy update. The reality is that for many of us, Facebook is the engine of growth. And if there is a meaningful decline in the effectiveness of that tool, it will make growing e-commerce businesses harder. All of us, I think we've underappreciated the magic of this tool for many years. It's the greatest advertising product ever created, and it's not close. And it's based around their ability to do this incredible thing, which is to identify an in-market or shopper that may be interested in your product, take your ad in a very native format and put it in front of them in a way that we can track, measure, and report on, and then build algorithms to find more people like those people. If suddenly the amount of data signals that they have access to create that magical connection decreases meaningfully, does the effectiveness drop? Well, it's certainly possible, and it's something we're going to be keeping a close eye on. But if that happens, it's going to make growth more difficult. It's going to make new customer acquisition more difficult. It's going to force people into longer lead time marketing initiatives like organic channels of SEO and content and audience development, which don't mean that you can't grow. They just mean you'll grow at a different rate. That the process, Andrew Ferris, who runs 4x400, likes to talk about this difference between growing rice and buying rice. At the end of both, you have rice. One just takes longer. And so growth rates might change if suddenly this new customer acquisition engine that we could just click a button and make the budget go up on decreases in effectiveness. And then the fourth and fifth things are really just about increases in competition. And this is in two directions, both from the top, meaning giant businesses. I remember a year ago, I read a story in this where I had a conversation with a large sort of CPG brand, one of the ones you've heard of. And the way they talked to me about direct to consumer was that their interest in the channel was about data. It wasn't about revenue, that the revenue was inconsequential, that what they wanted was information. Now, suddenly, all these players, and this is going from Nike, who's historically been a great digital player, to now saying it is going to be a priority one, to other people entering for the very first time, Heinz Ketchup selling on a website or snacks.com showing up to sell. Suddenly you have a prioritization of direct-to-consumer based on the macro trend of how people are buying online, including categories like grocery where they historically wouldn't have. So what this means is that giant players with huge wallets are showing up to compete for our internet real estate. They're in our tiny little pond where before they ignored us, they thought we were too small to matter. And now all of a sudden, every SERP, every Instagram ad inventory, every email inbox is more chock full of competition than ever before. But it's not just the big guys too. Harley Finkelstein in the piece I reference has this data point that Shopify touts that every 28 seconds a new Shopify store owner makes their first sale. It's incredible. And in a lot of ways, that's great for our industry. It's great for e-commerce and all of the associated tools that will benefit from it. But for you as an individual store owner, that just means more competition. The barrier to entry is becoming lower and lower as more access to manufacturers and the tools to start a store all become easier for every person, not just in the United States, but around the world to access. So in every product category, and you watch this happen, if you think of like a great example of this is that if you go and do a deep insight into what happened in the masks category, okay, and how fast the competition filled that void of demand, it will signal to you just how competitive this landscape gets when there's opportunity. Masks, when it started, there's these stories of these brands that had this legacy SEO placement around face masks that nobody searched for. And it was very tiny volume that suddenly had massive businesses. But very quickly, all the big players came and ate up that search engine real estate. They ate up the competition for the keywords. They ate up the Amazon placements. And the amount of brands that suddenly were making masks was incredible. It happened so fast. And that's one of the incredible things about our industry is that every opportunity gets optimized down to the last penny. And all the profits in many categories exist until they get competed away by lowering price. And so that's just going to demand that you have pricing power built on brand, that you have relationships in the ability to ensure that the reason people aren't buying your product is because of price. Because if it is, all the profits will get competed away eventually. If you can't hold your pricing power, it's going to be damaging. So those two competitors are making this environment more and more difficult. You're in a category now that is the hottest, coolest place to be. That just means that to stand out, you have to be better than ever before. So all of these things to me mean that the next phase of growth is going to be more challenging, that the brands that win are going to be those that are disciplined, that they learn how to maximize their margin, minimize their cash conversion cycle, maximize their LTV, improve the relationship with their customers, and they build a brand. They have larger owned audiences. They have more diverse traffic mixes. They have more diverse distribution. Those are the brands that are going to succeed. And in a lot of ways, they're the brands that always have. But it's been masked by how effective the arbitrage has been on this paid media thing for so many years that many brands didn't have to pursue all those quality business fundamentals in order to grow and make money. But it's changing. The landscape is going to be different. And that's the idea of the Tempest versus the tidal wave. The thing that has pushed us all forward for the last 12 months is calming. It's going away. And that's great for us as a society, but it's a challenge to us as business owners about how are we going to grow in this next phase. And that's what we have to consider. And so that's what the article is all about. And that's what CTC, my business, is here to do, because we have brands that have to make it through this phase. We have to win. And then we have to provide strategy and services to brands to help you do the same. So I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, both on the article, on this YouTube post. What is your view of this next phase? What is it going to look like in your mind? How is e-commerce going to move forward? Is it going to continue to be a tidal wave, or is it more Tempest? What do you think? Would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening, and appreciate the ongoing engagement with all of you. Excited to keep learning and figure out how we continue to push this thing forward. So thanks for your time.